Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian, and welcome to Bird Bombs, Helpful Bursts of ID Info. This is episode 28, Colorado Bird Taxonomy Made Simple. Well, we'll see how simple it really is, but hopefully it's gonna be a nice door into this topic. And if you have any questions or comments as we go along tonight, please share those. I'm joined by Laura Stedman, who will be assisting at the end to present any questions or comments you might have, so I welcome those. And tonight, what we're really talking about is relationships. Where do things fit together, and how does that knowledge of that help us in our efforts as birders, both in our understanding, in our communication, and in what we try to do when we're identifying birds. I put some images here of 6 different species that I found over the months and years when I'm out on field trips, and will maybe encounter these different species, some of them more often than others. And I won't tell you what they are, so I'll let you look at them and you can probably figure them out for the most part. Maybe not all of them, but maybe you'll get them all. And I asked people, we're looking at, say, the bird in the upper left, and we talked about what it is, and I asked, what is it related to? And in that question, often I'm meaning what family is the bird in? And a lot of times people don't know the answer to that question for these different species and a lot of other species. So we're really keyed in on species, but we don't always think about the broader picture of bird relationships. So that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about tonight as we explore Colorado bird taxonomy. So right off the bat, let's put a definition up for taxonomy. So it is the science of naming, describing, and classifying organisms. And this includes all living things on planet Earth. So plants, animals, and microorganisms, they all have fit into a classification scheme, and we give names to all of them. Well, we haven't named all of them yet, but we've named quite a lot of them. And the word taxonomy is coming from the Greek root word taxis, which is referring to order and arrangement of things. So a taxonomic classification system is a ranked or hierarchical system that seeks to put things into different compartments to describe their relationships with each other, whether closely related or more distantly related. So who is related to whom, and how closely related are they? That's the question we're talking about when we're talking about taxonomy. And right away, we encounter taxonomy in our birding world all the time. Here's a beginning of an eBird checklist, and it's in taxonomic order. It begins nowadays with waterfowl first. This happens to be a Jefferson County list that I've opened up, getting ready to enter things, and it's listing all the different species of waterfowl that are on this filter for Jefferson County, and they're in a particular order. It's not a random order. It's showing relationships among different individual birds. And if you look at the list in the broader perspective, it's showing us the more ancient, or what's considered now to be the more ancient or earlier evolved lineages, are presented first, and we make our way through the list to the bottom, reaching those groups that are thought to be more recently evolved. So there is a sensibility to what we see on our bird list, and we encounter the same sort of order in pretty much all of our bird books. Now, some might be arranged a little bit differently based on sort of what the bird does or colors or what have you, but most of them are arranged more or less to match the current thought for taxonomic order. So it's something we encounter all the time, and birders are very interested in aspects of our taxonomy, most especially what counts as a species. Have I seen that one yet? How many are on my list? These are thoughts that are in our heads as birders all the time. So it's really drawing from that taxonomy. And there's 2 elements in taxonomy that we encounter as birders over time. And this is the idea of combining species, or what we call lumping. Boo, we don't like lumping species because we might lose one on our list. That's combining species that were considered different. We just experienced that recently here in Colorado with the hoary redpoll being combined with two other redpoll species into just redpoll now. So we went from having hoary and common redpoll recorded in Colorado to just having the one species. So a little lumping happened there. Another recent lump happened last year with Cordilleran and Pacific slope flycatchers lumped into Western flycatcher. And the other idea is splitting. We love splitting. Yes, we get more species. In fact, splitting is more predominant than lumping in modern ornithological history, like in the last several decades. And a lot of what's driving taxonomy these days is related to analysis of genetics. And as we've been able to look more carefully, we get a more detailed idea of who's related to who, and we've adjusted a lot of things in our taxonomic understanding. Ironically, the lump of the Pacific slope and Cordilleran flycatcher was a reversal of a split that happened, I think, in the 1980s, early 80s, I believe, when the Western flycatcher was divided into Cordilleran and Pacific slope, but then it was relumped again. So it's a give and take in the birding world. So what I want to emphasize tonight as kind of a take-home message for all Colorado birders is to become familiar with different bird families and genera. We'll talk a little bit more about what those words mean, but become familiar with those different groupings beyond the species level that we're always interested in as birders, because that's what we apply the names to when we're out birding. Oh, there's a blue jay, but that blue jay is in a genus along with the Steller's jay, genus Cyanocida, and it's in a family, Corvidae. And those different terms are implying different relationships that are informative for us. So if we pay attention to these things, become familiar with different bird families and genera, it will help us in our ability to narrow down our ID choices. So if we can recognize that something is in a certain group, and it may be at a broad level, like I recognize that as a kind of sparrow. Well, that gets us a lot of the way out of a lot of potential small songbirds to say that's a sparrow. So improve your ability to narrow down your ID choices. It also improves our communication. When we're talking about a sparrow, say, we can say, it's that sparrow over there versus saying there's a little brown bird that's down low and it has its tail cocked up or whatever it is. So it's no longer a little brown bird, but now we're saying a sparrow, which is helping us a lot in our communication. So think about it that way. It also will improve your appreciation of our birds. Understand kind of what their story is, who's related to who is a big part of the story. So you'll grow in your appreciation of our birds as you come to an understanding of taxonomy, most especially bird families and genera. So here's the taxonomic hierarchy, and you maybe learned this back in high school or maybe in college if you did in high school, and it is back up here. It is a hierarchical ranking from the broadest category at the top. And when I learned this in school, domain wasn't referenced, but now it is. And so I knew kingdom, phylum, class, working downward here to more specific groupings. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. All right, and there's even an acronym for remembering that. It has something to do with Dear King Philip came over for great spaghetti. I don't think that's quite it, but that works. But the main thing you want to recognize here is that there is this hierarchical ordering, and the number of kingdoms is only 3, and domains rather is only 3, and there's like 4 different kingdoms. Sorry, I'm getting that a little bit mixed up, but the domain Eukarya of our broadest category includes basically animals, plants, fungi, and protists. All right, and then we can narrow it down. So we're going to use our Western flycatcher, now relumped as Western flycatcher, as an example. And it is in the kingdom Animalia, animals, and it's in the phylum Chordata. Those are the animals with backbones. All right, so now we're narrowing it down further and we're getting down to the class, Aves. So now we're specifically in birds. And within the class Aves, there are a number of orders, but the Western flycatcher is in an order called Passeriformes, perching birds. And it's in the family Tyrannidae. So notice with the orders and families, they have particular endings for birds that are consistent. So orders always end in the suffix -iformes, and families end in the suffix -ed. So tyrannidae, passeriformes. You'll always encounter those particular endings for those two particular levels in our taxonomic hierarchy. And then as we move down into genus, we're getting more specific now. So the family Tyrannidae was all the tyrant flycatchers, which worldwide here, that's a New World family. There's something like 500 or so. It's a very, very big family of birds. But the genus for the Western flycatcher is Empidonax, and that's a much smaller grouping, and it's a particular style of flycatcher that all pretty much look exactly like the Western flycatcher with some minor details. So little green jobs, right? And then we can narrow it down further to the particular species, in this case, Empidonax difficilis. And we call that species name the specific epithet. So notice that the plural for genus is genera. So if I mention genera, I'm talking about the plural for genus. And then not shown on the hierarchy on the left of the screen, but listed here on my right-hand side, I've added subspecies. And those are particular identifiable forms or differentiatable forms, and not always so easy to identify for us in the field, but are often geographically located within an overall species. So in the case of the Western flycatcher, we have the one that were calling Cordilleran until last summer. It's actually made up of two different subspecies, as eBird will reveal to you if you pay attention to the Latin names in eBird, Occidentalis and Helmeri. So, but they come together to form our Cordilleran flycatcher in eBird. All right, so notice that species have binomial scientific names. They're comprised of the genus, which is always capitalized, and the specific epithet, and which is never capitalized, and the two of them are given in italics when they're written out. So we can even take that a little further, and we can add subspecies names given after the genus and species name. And sometimes you'll see the genus and species might be abbreviated and just a particular subspecies name listed. So ED for Empidonax difficilis, and then the subspecies Occidentalis. All right, so what it's all about is similar related species are placed into groups. And a particular group at whatever level of that hierarchical table is called taxa. And so a species is a taxa, but a family is also a taxa. So the arrangement and ordering of species and other taxa, higher levels, is not a fixed thing. It changes over time as our understanding grows and develops. So really the classification system that we encounter now on eBird, in our bird books, is reflecting a set of working hypotheses about the relationships and similarities and differences among birds. And those ideas can change over time, as we've all experienced in different ways, even if you've not been a birder very long. We just encountered that, for example, with the lumping of the redpolls. But these things don't stay the same forever. So when I started birding, some things were a little bit different than they are now. And that's probably true for a lot of you. And if you go back to older bird books, you're going to find that some things have changed. One of the changes we can see reflected right here on these images here, which are showing mostly different birds of prey, we call them. That's kind of a catch-all term. That's not a taxonomic term, not relating directly to classification. And certainly our understanding has evolved to show us that these are not all necessarily so closely related. So there was a time going back when we would have seen the turkey vulture family listed in the same order as the families that have the osprey and the two hawks that are shown here. And then also that same order included the falcon that we have on the lower right. So one order encompassed all those things. Nowadays, they're in 3 different orders. And in fact, we've learned that the falcons are not closely related to the hawks at all. In fact, they're well removed on our eBird list now and in our books and placed closer to the parrots, because that is the group that they're most closely related to, as has been revealed by genetic analyses. So things change, our understanding of arrangements changes over time. Do you know what all these birds are? Probably some of them are pretty easy. Turkey vulture, working to the right, osprey, Cooper's hawk, red-tailed hawk, and prairie falcon. And that is a Nande parakeet up there on the right. We don't have that one in Colorado. That's the only picture tonight that's not a Colorado bird. So I thought it would be fun to pull some information from some older books that I have and kind of look at just briefly some of these changes that have happened. This is from a 1902 publication called Handbook of Birds of the Western United States by Florence Merriam Bailey. And this was an important book in its time. And it lists a bunch of orders, and none of those order names are the same as the names of orders we have now. A couple of them are a little bit close, but most of them are pretty different. And if you look at the descriptions to the right of them, they kind of group the birds based sort of on their physical characteristics and behavioral characteristics. So we have long-winged swimmers, that is your Jaegers, et cetera, and gulls and terns. Then tube-nosed swimmers, which are the tube noses, so albatrosses and shearwaters and such. Then toady palmate swimmers, that means things that have all their toes webbed together. And so we see like cormorants and pelicans in there. And the order names are completely different for those groups than they are now. So that's kind of interesting to see how things have changed over time since way back then. Now, flipping forward here to my 1961 edition of Peterson's Guide to Western Birds, we see that the names of, he doesn't list orders here, but we see different family names. And some of them have stayed the same. For example, the first two listed on both these are the grebes and loons, Gaviidae and Podicipedidae, and those haven't changed. But as you go on down, you'll see that some things are not quite in the order that we're familiar with. For example, you open your eBird list now or most new bird books, and you'll see waterfowl right at the beginning. Well, that wasn't the case back in the day. It was loons and grebes at the beginning, and waterfowl a number of pages into the book. So that's an example of something that's changed. And we can see here the combination a little lower down of the vultures and eagles and hawks and things and falcons and osprey all kind of grouped together here on the checklist, or in this case the index for the book. And we're just talking about how that's changed. So let's bump it forward now. 1983, my edition of Birds of North America. This was the first field guide I bought starting out as a birder that year, and it's a great book. I still love that book. I don't use it anymore, but I do like it. And we see now that things are looking a little bit more familiar in terms of a lot of the names of things and some of their groupings. But again, the waterfowl are still trailing way down on the list here, and we see vultures, hawks, and falcons still together in one order, Falconiformes. We're just saying how that's not the case. So let's go up now to our 2024 checklist of North and Middle American birds by the American Ornithological Society. This is the standard listing of birds that most people follow here in the US. eBird uses a taxonomy called the Clements taxonomy, which here in North America coincides very, very closely, but it's a world taxonomy that's more useful for eBird's purposes than the AOS taxonomy. But we see now the waterfowl and Seriformes. Let me toss up the common names of these orders if you're not familiar with them. The waterfowl are now right there at the top of the list, followed by the game birds, upland game birds, which used to be following after the waterfowl, but way down the list. And we see the grebes are still near the top, but we don't see loons listed here at all because they're further down than my little sample shows. So a lot of changes going on in the ordering of things reflected in our different books over the years. It's kind of fun. So the species is the currency of taxonomy. Everything's kind of flowing from that in this, and it's as we were saying, the species are given by binomials. So we have a genus and specific epithet in italics, and they are rooted in the species names. Scientific names are rooted mostly in Latin and Greek, but we also encounter a lot of words from other languages and also the names of people and places in there. And pronunciation of some of these names varies, even among experts. So it's okay if you don't quite know how to pronounce it, just do your best, just go for it, and you'll kind of get there. So the species concept remains debated. There's different concepts for species concepts of what defines and constitutes a species. But the category of the species is really the least subjective category of those main groupings we saw in the hierarchy of taxonomy. But they're still constructs that we've come up with, and they exist at a particular point in time. And that, as we were just looking at, can change. As time goes along, our understandings of things change, and so our understanding of species can change as well. So what a species is and how that definition is applied, therefore, are subjective. All right, so it's the least subjective category, but how we apply it is a subjective thing. And some populations are clear, discrete species, very clear about that. Others seem to be in the midst of differentiating, and things are a lot messier. Our gulls listed here are a good example of messiness in our species naming and understanding among our birds. And there's several different concepts that attempt to address the complexity, but sometimes that results in competing interpretations. So if you look at these gulls, I've actually listed the second and third as American herring gull and Vega gull. And you might say, whoa, those aren't species. It should be Larus argentatus in both cases, just a herring gull with different subspecies. But an advanced look at some taxonomic changes that eBird will be employing when the Clements list updates in the fall are suggesting that they're going to be splitting out the American herring gull as a species versus the Vega gull, which we do have as a rarity here in the US. So things are in flux, and gulls are a primary example of that. We just recently, in recent years, saw the Thayer's gull, which had been split out from a herring gull, lumped with the Iceland gull. So now we no longer, it used to be herring gull, and then it was herring and Thayer's, and Iceland was separate. And now we just have we have herring and Iceland with different subspecies there, and now the herring will be separated from Vega, et cetera. It gets confusing, so don't sweat it. Just refer to eBird or another great list for what you're going to follow, and just have fun looking at gulls. They're hard enough anyway, right? So here we have our hierarchy turned upside down from the earlier slide, reflecting the fact that as we go down through the hierarchy, the number of organisms in each of these taxonomic groupings increases. And so I've got our Colorado avian stats here in the blue box in the middle. And there's only one class in Colorado, birds, right? All birds in the world are in that one class, aves. But we have 20 different orders of birds that have been recorded in Colorado. Not real likely to add another order of birds, but it's not impossible. Like if a penguin shows up or an ostrich or something like that, we could throw in a whole other order of birds. But we have 20, so that's a pretty big grouping. All of our different birds in Colorado are combined into one of those 20 orders. And then we have 63 families of birds recorded in Colorado. In fact, we just added a new family a couple of years ago with our most recent new species for the state, which was the limpkin shown on the right. In fact, that was the individual bird that added that family for Colorado. So that's kind of cool. But 63 different families, so our number is increasing. And then there's about 255 different genera. I tried to count them up, and I think that's correct. I might be off by one or two. So the number is increasing further. We're up to 3 digits now, and that just about more than doubles as we go to the number of species found in Colorado. Now, it was 519 now, but it was 520 very recently until that lump of this hoary redpoll with the common redpoll giving us just the redpoll. So we're back down to 519, and we're really overdue for another new species in the state. I do have a bird bombs called First State Record from late December of 2022, which takes a stab at predicting what might be the next new species in Colorado. I wasn't correct because limpkin showed up and that wasn't on the the short list presented in that bird bombs, but that's kind of how it always goes. And then there's a lot of different subspecies. I don't know how many, I didn't take the time to determine for Colorado, but there's a lot of them. So the numbers just increase as you work your way down. So let's let's introduce two terms here. We won't worry about them too much, but it's good to be aware of this. We have what are called monotypic taxa, and it makes sense when you think of mono, one taxa. So it's a taxa comprised of one taxa. So for example, a monotypic genus would have only one species in it. Monotypic family would have only one genus, and it might have just one species as well. Polytypic taxa are comprised of two or more taxa. So most of our families and genera are polytypic. A polytypic species would have just one subspecies and no others, but most species have more than one subspecies. So we have monotypic taxa and polytypic taxa. So we'll kind of keep that in mind. And for example, here's a monotypic genus Bartramia, which is the genus for the upland sandpiper. And the upland sandpiper is the only member of that genus. And notice I can just abbreviate the genus name with a capital B for Bartramia. And then there's a polytypic genus example, the Calidris genus in the sandpiper family. And it's a big genus consisting of 24 different species of sandpipers. Western sandpiper as an example for that. These are mostly small sandpipers. So you have quite a range of possibilities from the one species in a genus to maybe quite a number of species in a genus. And I've got a quiz for you. We'll come back to this later. Got three birds shown on the right. I've named them for you, the limpkin, osprey, and yellow-breasted chat. And what do these unique three, they are unique, right? I mean, they are species. So they're unique in that sense, but maybe they're unique in another way. But what do they have in common that none of our other birds in Colorado can share? All right, so we'll leave that on the table. We're thinking taxonomically here, of course. I'm not saying like, well, they all eat fish or whatever it is. They don't. Yes, they're all birds, but that's not unique, right? So let's leave that behind. We'll come back to that quiz question. What do these unique three have in common? So what I want to do now is have a little tour through our 20 orders of birds in Colorado, kind of see how things are laid out, appreciate and have a look at some of the great diversity of birds that we enjoy here in Colorado. So again, these are ordered like you would see them in eBird, and there may be some orders of things that you would find in your bird book, depending on which book you're looking at, that you don't see in this listing, because these are only orders that have been recorded in Colorado. All right. And so we're in that taxonomic order, going from the more ancient lineages, working our way down to the more recently evolved lineages. So we begin with the Anseriformes, which are our waterfowl, and they're all just in one big family. And then we have the Galliformes, which are our upland game birds, essentially, quail and turkey and grouse and chickens and such. And then we have Podicipediformes, and those are our grebes. And by the way, the name Podicipediformes is coming from a root word that podiciped that essentially can translate as an ass foot. That's ASS foot, because the feet are so far back on the bird's body that it's like they're coming right out of its ass. And I'm going to come back to that with the September bird bombs about grebes. So Podicipediformes. And then next up in line is the Columbiformes. So these are our pigeons and doves. And I'm wondering if all of these names in blue on the left are familiar to you. Hopefully they'll become familiar to you if you put a little effort into checking it out in your different resources. So next up is Cuculiformes. I love that word, Cuculiformes. It's a cuckoos, of course, but did you know that a roadrunner is a cuckoo? Isn't that neat? Well, indeed they are. And I put in yellow here the number of families in each of these orders. You'll notice that some of them just have one family. And that's kind of also usually a clue that it's a little bit less diverse. The Anseriformes is an exception because it's actually quite a large family of birds. Then we have I always have to look hard at this word to pronounce it correctly, Capra mulgiformes is the nightjars, right? So poor wills, nighthawks, and things like that are in Capra mulgiformes. And then we have one of my favorite orders, Apodoformes. Apoda means without feet. And the swifts, their feet are so small and well, they're not and weak in their way that they can't grasp like to perch. Now hunters can perch, but their feet are very tiny. Swifts just cling on to things. They don't grasp around a twig like hummingbird or other perching birds might do. But Apodoformes is referring to the very small feet, even almost without feet. Of course, they do have feet. So swifts and hummingbirds. Then Gruiformes are rails, cranes. Limpkin is in that order, Gruiformes. We have Charadriiformes we see with 6 families, so a pretty diverse group here of different shorebird families, Jaegers, alcids like murres and puffins, and gulls and terns and skimmers are all in this big family, Charadriiformes. When you have 2 eyes in a order name or even a family name, it's like Charadriiformes. So the first has that E sound is how we're going to pronounce it, at least here in bird bombs. But you know what? Say it however you're going to say it, but try to get it right. And then we have another double I there, the loons, Gaviiformes. And loons are kind of interesting because the loons are monotypic most of the way down the hierarchy. So we have the order Gaviiformes with just one family, Gaviidae, and then only one genus in that family, Gavia, all the same word. So it makes it kind of interesting to learn it. And then there's 5 species within that family. So it's kind of cool to see that monotypic quality going all the way down. And we don't have that reflected in too many of our orders. So that's kind of a neat thing. So next time you see a loon species out there, you can say, well, there's a Gavia out there, and impress your neighbors and friends. So let's keep it moving down our taxonomic list, our ordered list here. So after the loons comes Ciconia-formes. That's the storks. So big guys. There's only one, wood stork is the only one that's been recorded in Colorado. I'm not sure if there's just one record or more than one, but pretty rare. And then Suliformes is our cormorants, boobies, frigate birds, and hingas. Now, except for the cormorants, the rest of these are rare in our state, but 4 different families in Suliformes. And next comes Pelicaniformes. So we see some similarities in cormorants and pelicans with their throat pouch, but there's also a lot of differences, and indeed they're in different orders. And the pelicans not only include the pelicans, but some other birds we might not think about as being particularly grouped with pelicans, like herons and ibises. So, but they are in the family Pelicaniformes. Then our next one down is the lovely Cathartiformes, the New World vultures. Different from the Old World vultures, which are in the next order, Accipitriformes, but our New World vultures are in Cathartiformes, and so that's condors and turkey vulture, for example. And then working down, we get now finally to the hawks, which is a complex group, but really divided into just 2 different families. So a lot of different sorts of names of things in this family, from hawks and osprey and kites and harriers and eagles, but all within Accipitriformes. Another set of birds of prey are mostly nighttime birds of prey are owls and Strigiformes, 2 different families there. Strigiformes. And then one of my favorites, the belted kingfisher, is our representative of Carassiiformes, and it's our only kingfisher we have here in Colorado. You go other parts in the U.S., you can find a few more kinds of kingfishers if you're lucky. And then the next one down is, now I like to call this Picaformes because it sounds more like a woodpecker pecking, but another pronunciation could be Pisciformes. All right, so the woodpecker family, represented here by, I'm not going to say what it is, you can figure it out. And then finally the Falconiformes, which used to be grouped back up there with the hawks and the osprey and the kites, and even one time the New World vultures, all in the order Falconiformes. Now that order's been shifted down and away, and we don't have any parrots on our list here because we don't have any in Colorado, but they would be closely aligned in the list with Falconiformes. There's our last one. So see if you can name all these ones here. I didn't play that game with the last slide, but we've got wood stork, double-crested cormorant, and brown pelican. That's a Chatfield State Park brown pelican there, a Colorado version from a few years ago across the top. And then we have a turkey vulture, of course, and with that nice big dark belly and those big dark marks in the wing, rough-legged hawk, little juvenile northern saw-whet owl, great little bird, of course, belted kingfisher, the woodpecker. Can you figure it out? It is the American three-toed woodpecker. And then the American kestrel with that nice orangey tail and dots on the wings and lots of other things, making it distinctive as our Falconiformes representative. So that was 19 different orders, but we're down to the last one here. And I'm going to treat it specially because it is especially diverse. This is the Passeriformes, or the perching birds. And our Passeriformes in Colorado includes a whopping 28 different families. This is nearly the whole second half of our bird book. So we're looking at orders, but I've listed out all these 28 families here, and we'll just kind of cruise through them so we can appreciate the fantastic diversity in our Passeriformes, or perching birds. And again, so we have the common names for these groups, and then in parentheses, we have the scientific name. And if you're not familiar with some of those, it's a good endeavor to learn the bird families. So you at least want to kind of learn what are the different families that we have and know their names, and the common names at least. And it's not too hard to learn some of the scientific names, especially if you consider sometimes what they mean. But kind of neat to consider those different names, and we'll explore that just a little bit. So I'm going several at a time here. We've got our tyrant flycatchers, represented by this scissortail flycatcher. And our vireos is next up in line, yellow-throated vireo. And how about our shrikes? We have just two shrikes here in Colorado, the Laniidae and loggerhead shrike here with a little salamander, I believe, in its bill. And then we've got jays and crows. Now, I think it ought to be jays and ravens because I like ravens a lot more than crows, but commonly called, the family is commonly called jays and crows, or corvids, and coming from the family name Corvidae, right? And we've got our Canada jay there, formerly gray jay. And then we have chickadees and titmice, with juniper titmice atop a juniper. And we have just one kind of lark, the horned lark here in Colorado, representing the lark family, Alaudidae. And laud is coming from the word to praise. And I think it has to do with their song, and they're up in the air singing, kind of giving praise. So that's how I like to remember that, Alaudidae. And then a beautiful violet green swallow over here for Hirundinidae. Hirundinidae is the swallow family. So we're just about a quarter of the way through the diversity of families in Passeriformes. The wonderful bush tit is their only member of that family, Aegithalidae, that we have here in Colorado. That's a picture from my backyard on my special feeder there as they're tromping in. It's wonderful to see that. So there's a lot of bush tits at a time, but they're only in one family. And then a beautiful golden crown kinglet representing the two kinglets that we have in Regulidae. And then similarly, the waxwing family has just two species here in Colorado, the cedar waxwing and this Bohemian waxwing. And then a special one there on the right is the Phainopepla. So that's a rarity here in Colorado, but it has occurred. I'm not sure if there's more than one record, but very, very few. And then we move on to some tree trunk birds, nuthatches, Psittaceae, creepers, Certheidae, and there are other sorts of creepers in the world. You can go down into South America and find wood creepers, very large family and diverse. This little group just has one representative for us here, the Certheidae, of which there are several different subspecies, so it has some diversity below the species level. And then the gnatcatchers, Polyatilidae, all right, so the gnatcatcher family. Beautiful birds. So let's look at the second half of those 28. So we just looked at 14 families, and here's going to be 14 more of them as we continue to cruise through this amazing diversity. And notice we're going in the same order that you encounter on your checklist, that you encounter in your books. And we'll see how eBird helps us with that a little bit later when we look at some photos of eBird screens. So we have the wren family, Troglodytidae, which refers to cave dwellers, and some wrens are kind of that way, right? Cave dwellers. And then the thrasher mockingbirds are in the family Mimidae. And we think about mimids mimicking something. Mockingbirds do that, as does the brown thrasher, and other kinds of thrashers imitate other birds. So Mimidae. And then the lovely Eurasian starling, representing the starling family, Sternidae, which we have just the one member of it, introduced family here for us in North America. And then the dippers. There's 5 different kinds of dippers in the world. North America just has one, the American dipper, representing Cinclidae. I don't know if the cincla is referring to the 5 or what's going on with that, but continuing down, we have what I think should be our state bird, the mountain bluebird, as a representative for the thrushes. And any adolescent boy should be interested in the family name of the thrushes, the thrush family, Turdidae. All right, so that's kind of fun, Turdidae. And in fact, we have the genus, the American robin is in the genus Turdus. So you can have fun with that. The Old World sparrows, another introduced family represented by the house sparrow, of course. And then wagtails and pipits are the Motacillidae. Now, we don't have any wagtails yet in Colorado. Maybe one day one will be found. But we do have American pipit as a representative for that group here. And then a beautiful brown cap rosy finch representing the finches and allies in the family Fringillidae. So this includes like evening grosbeak, house finches, goldfinches, the rosy finches, the redpoll, and some others. And then a neat group that a lot of birders want to see and sometimes have to put a little effort into would be longspurs, and close relative, the snow bunting, and further north, the McKay's bunting, not here in Colorado, but our longspurs here with a chestnut-collared longspur, Calcareidae is the longspur family. And then our state bird, one day to be replaced by the mountain bluebird, but for now the lark bunting is still our state bird, but it's not a bunting and it's not a lark. So we saw the larks in their own family, and there's a snow bunting in the family with the longspurs. There's some other things we call buntings that are in the last group, the cardinals and allies, like our lazuli bunting. And then there's a whole group of old world buntings that are different yet. So the lark bunting is a good example of how a common name might not reflect the lineage of a bird. All right, so sometimes the common names arrive because of apparent similarities when people name the birds, but there's a lot of different things with the word lark in there. And actually, I'll say a little bit more about that, but we've got the lark bunting representing our New World sparrows, or Passerellidae. And so a lot of the things that have the term lark are big singers, and they often sing up on the wing. So the horned lark sings in flight. Lark buntings make song flights. Western meadowlarks also make song flights. Not sure about the lark sparrow. There you've got a real mix, but that actually is a sparrow. So beware with some of the common names of species. If you're trying to derive an understanding of who they're related to, it can sometimes lead you astray. So then we have the yellow-breasted chat in the family Icteriidae, a fairly recently recognized family. It used to be combined with the wood warblers, which we see coming right up down the list there, but it never did fit. Never did fit. It was a lot bigger, it sang differently, a lot of big old bill and so on. And indeed, it's been now determined to be not so closely related to the wood warblers. And we see a whole other family inserted in between in our listing, the blackbird family, Icteridae. So notice the chat is Icteriidae and the blackbirds are Icteridae. So pretty similar names. Then the wood warblers, Parulidae, and the cardinals and allies, Cardinalidae. A lot of diversity in that last family represented by the cardinal. So here, I won't read all these names, but here's all 63 families in Colorado, so you can appreciate the diversity. So those Passeriformes families begin with tyrant flycatchers and go all the way to the end. So it's nearly half of the group is our Passeriformes, or about at least 2/3. Okay, so not all families are equal in terms of their diversity. We've got some families that have a lot of different species, wood warblers and waterfowl families leading the list, each with over 40 different species recorded in Colorado. And working on down, so these are the top 10 most diverse families in Colorado. Wood warblers, waterfowl, sandpipers, New World sparrows, gulls and allies, tyrant flycatchers, hawks, blackbirds, finches and allies, and cardinals and allies. So these are the real diverse groups. And we have a number of families that are sort of only child families. They're represented in the state by just one species. Not that there aren't other species in some cases elsewhere in the world or even in our country, but here in Colorado, these are represented just by single species that have been found here in the state. I put an asterisk next to some of the family names. These are rarities in Colorado, represented by just very small numbers of records. The rest are regularly occurring. And I've highlighted these three in yellow that go back to our quiz from earlier. Remember, the quiz was, what do these unique three have in common? So I remember limpkin, osprey, and yellow-breasted chat. And maybe you know, but I'm going to give you the answer right here. So if you're watching the video later and you still want to guess, you better put it on pause because here comes the answer. They are all the only members in all the world of their monotypic families. So the osprey family includes just the osprey. The limpkin family includes only the limpkin, and the yellow-breasted chat family includes only the yellow-breasted chat. I think that's kind of cool. I think there's 27 or so different families worldwide that are represented this way by just one species. So it's kind of a rarity out of all the world families, which is something on the order of 250 or so families of birds in the world. So these are special birds. So next time you see an osprey or yellow-breasted chat, remember that they are members of monotypic families. And you can, again, amaze your friends and relatives with that little factoid there. So we're going to take a short little delve into looking a little more closely and considering subspecies. Now, I want you to notice on this eBird portion of an eBird checklist that I have here that it's grouping the birds according to families. So we have kingfisher family, woodpecker family, further down the falcon family there. So we see that same ordering that we've been talking about reflected. So when you look at your eBird list, at least on the web page, the app doesn't show this, but you can learn family names or groupings just by paying attention to that. And you can also turn on your preferences on the web page to show you scientific names. And they're a little harder to read because they're in a paler font. But that can be an easy way to kind of look at what's grouped with what within different genera. And you can see in these woodpeckers, for example, genus Cypropicus, genus Melanerpes, Picoides, but American three-toed woodpecker, which was formerly grouped with the others that are now separated out into Dryobates, and on down to the flickers, Calaptes. So we can see they're an easy way to help learn about some of the different genera. But what we can focus on is we see that in parentheses on our eBird list, it gives us some options for different forms below the species level. And eBird uses things that are either full-on subspecies or often are groups of subspecies that go by this name of subspecific forms. That's I can't see all my screen because part of my Zoom feature is blocking it, but you can read it up there. So they group together different subspecies. So when you see, for example, look closely at the downy woodpecker eastern, and the Latin name, Dryobates pubescens, has two different things with a slash there, pubescens / medianus, indicating there are at least those two subspecies within that group we call eastern. So it's not quite correct to say it's the eastern subspecies. We could say it's the eastern form or eastern group would be more correct. But eBird gives us a couple choices to work with in the case of the downy woodpecker, and similarly, some different choices with the flicker, which here on this list, since it's a summertime listing, it doesn't list the yellow shafted as an option. If I did a winter list, it would. But here's two flickers here, the red shafted and yellow shafted flicker, two different subspecies or subspecies groups Notice it lists the red-shafted as the Kafer group because there's different subspecies in there. So we can say it's a red-shafted form. But these are identifiable things we can work with. Here's our downy woodpeckers, the eastern group or eastern form on the left and the Rocky Mountain form on the right. One of the main differences is the amount of white on the wing panel. Above the black and white barred flight feathers down here, we have white here, white dots, and no white dots from eastern to Rocky Mountain for the downy woodpecker. So now we'll kind of look at our jays, and sometimes we see an option and we might not even know how it's distinctive. Look at the Steller's jay, for example. It lists Steller's jay, the plain main group, and then you could choose Southwest Interior group. And that is the one that we have, the upper left picture out of these two jays, and it has white over the eye and white on the forehead. And that's the only kind that occurs in Colorado, and it's not rare. It's the only one. It's expected. And so it's given on all those checklists as being available for you to enter numbers in without having any problems relative to its rarity. But it doesn't list any other forms or groups of the Steller's jay, like this one on the right, which is what you would see out in California, the Pacific form or Pacific group, which is not listed on our Colorado eBird checklist here. So sometimes you might not even be aware of how to differentiate something that's listed on your eBird list. It's okay to go ahead and list it as Southwest Interior since that's the only one we have. But to be honest with yourself, it'd be kind of cool to figure out if you can actually visually identify, which you can in the case of the scrub jay. But you can't in the case of this mountain chickadee. And you see that eBird gives us a Rocky Mountains option. But in fact, the identity by sight in the field, I don't actually know how to differentiate it from a few other groups of the mountain chickadee, and you probably don't either. So I always kind of feel a little iffy about putting Rocky Mountain, mountain chickadee, because I don't even know why it's different. I do know that's what we have, but you know. And the last one of these we'll look at will focus on the great diversity of juncos that we enjoy during the winter. We have only one species that nests in Colorado on the lower right, the gray-headed. But if you're around in the wintertime, we have all these different possibilities, plus hybrids, and it gets pretty messy. But lots of different juncos to enjoy, given you as options on eBird. The slate-colored Cismontanus, Oregon, pink-sided, white-winged, and gray-headed. So these birds all have different breeding distributions, and they interbreed where they come into contact fairly extensively in some cases, but we can narrow it down to subspecies with our juncos. And you'll notice that some of these are actually listed as groups. The Oregon junco is not a straight-on subspecies in eBird, but it's the Oreganus group, including more than one subspecific form. And in some cases, we have birds that may well be recognized as full species one day. This is, we've got some white-breasted nuthatches, warbling vireos, and red crossbills shown here. And these are all things that are on the block to maybe be split out one day. And you may be familiar from eBird from the interior west red white-breasted nuthatch, which is what we have, say, here in Jefferson County, where I live. And the eastern form of the white-breasted nuthatch is out on eastern prairie and eastward. They are identifiable visually. There's some sex differences in these birds, but the visual identification is pretty subtle. And then we have the warbling vireo. We have a western form and an eastern form, and visually they're very, very similar, but it's the song that's different. And same thing with those white-breasted nuthatches. Their calls and things are distinctive if you know what you're listening to. So I can recognize a white-breasted interior west bird by its sound from an eastern bird. And with the red crossbills, visually, they're all very, very similar and hard to tell apart that way, but they have distinctive flight calls. So we're familiar with type 2, type 4, type 5, or at least the possibility of those if we don't see them, or maybe we can't differentiate them. Some people just say, oh, it's a red crossbill, and are happy with that. But indeed, this is a group that's ripe for maybe some potential splits in the future to a number of different species, and Colorado could add several of them. One was recently pulled out of the red crossbill, the cassia crossbill, several years ago. So an example of that. These are birds that are kind of cryptic visually, but by sound, they can be differentiated. So we'll go right back to the question I had for my field trip people at the beginning when we're seeing these different birds, most of which are familiar, some of which a little less so. And I ask, what is that bird? What group is that bird in? What family is that bird in? Where do I belong? And we'll start on the upper left. That is a Townsend solitaire, and it's in the thrush family. And what about this mockingbird in the top center? I'm not mockingbird, meadowlark, western meadowlark. A lot of people don't know that that bird is indeed in the blackbird family, Icteridae. And then the bobolink is kind of an oddity. Nothing quite looks like it, but you know, call up Merlin and listen to the bobolink song, and then listen to the western meadowlark song, and you'll see that there are a lot of similarities in their general character. And indeed, the bobolink is a kind of blackbird. All right, and so continuing around the clock here in lower right, we have a dickcissel, and another oddity, kind of a little separate from others in this group, but it is indeed in the cardinal family, the cardinalidae. It's a dickcissel where it belongs. And it's the very last bird on our list here in Colorado under our current taxonomy. And then we have in the middle, of course, a yellow-breasted chat. And we've already learned about that. So you know that's in the yellow-breasted chat family, Icteridae, one of those monotypic families. And what about the catbird on the left, lower left? Yeah, it is a Mimidae member, one of the thrasher's mockingbird family. All right, so we're going to not exit my screen share, but I'm going to invite Laura to come on here. If you're out there, Laura, I understand you might be riding in a car, but I'll wait till she comes on and she can help
Yeah,
if there's
can you hear
any.
me
I
okay?
can. Hey, you are in a car. All right. So if we have any
Thanks,
questions or
David. So our
comments?
first, if you do, yeah, so if you do have a question, type it in the Q&A and I can relay that to David. The first comment is as to the mnemonic for the kingdom, phylum, order, all that. They said King Philip came over for good soup.
Okay.
So
Good soup, good
good
spaghetti. It
soup, good
works either way.
spaghetti. Yeah.
Excellent. Good to know.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. Uh, what do you recommend doing if we're kind of new to to thinking about birds in this way, whether it's the subspecies or the family groups or genuses? Um, what's what should we be doing when we're birding to like try to pay more attention to that stuff?
Well, one thing is just to kind of realize what we're calling things. Now, I did note there's some exceptions for common names that are a little confusing and don't quite line up with their taxonomic relationships, but a lot of things do. So if we're calling things sparrows, well, they're in a particular group, and that group of sparrows overall is a family. So they're in the New World sparrow family. And as we're looking in our field guide, or maybe as I was showing you on eBird checklist or elsewhere, you'll see the different genera listed. So we don't normally most birders aren't tossing out names of genera when they're birding, but sometimes we do. We'll say that's an Impidinax. That's one we're familiar with because sometimes that's as far as we can get comfortably is to say it's one in that genus. But to kind of be aware of what the groups are that you're encountering and don't just let it wash over you. And if you don't know where something belongs, you really have no idea what an ibis is maybe related to, well, consider where it is on that list. So most of us are looking at eBird all the time, or if you look in your bird book, consider where it's placed and what it's next to get a sense of what it's related to and where it kind of fits into that overall picture.
Awesome. And any predictions on the next bird to be split or lumped that we're gonna see here in Colorado?
Well, I think some of those ones I just, I don't know because I'm not on any committee and I'm not privy. And a lot of the changes are related to detailed analyses of genetic relationships. And so sometimes that is something that is revealed as studies happen and are ongoing and develop. And it may be things that we weren't anticipating, such as the split of falcons away from the hawks and all of that. And so that was not anticipated, but was revealed in that way. So some of those things are a little hard to predict. But I think I look forward to having our white-breasted nuthatches split. our warbling vireo. I'm not so sure about the crossbills because it's going to become a big headache to try to identify them, since it's pretty much based on flight calls, which a lot of us don't recognize readily. But those would be some of the ones on my short list. Maybe the marsh wren be split into a western marsh wren and I guess an eastern marsh wren. One has many, many more songs than the other one. For example, the western one is extremely diverse song repertoire versus the eastern form.
I didn't realize that. I'll have to
Yeah,
start paying more attention to marsh wren songs then.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I don't see any other questions coming in, so thanks,
All
David.
right, good. Well, people are still thinking about it. So thank you, Laura. And let me continue on here. So this last episode will be up on our DFO webpage for review, or you might tell a friend to check it out, hopefully within a couple days. I'd like to thank, as always, the many photographers whose images were used for this presentation. I haven't yet counted up how many different species were represented in tonight's bird bombs, but there were a whole lot. And I'm really grateful to the many photographers whose work I was able to use to make bird bombs possible. So thank you very much. A few birds. And so quizzed everybody, what family are these birds all in? We have a red crossbill, evening grosbeak, and a black rosy finch. And they're all in the finch family. That's easy. Fringillidae. How about that? In fact, we have a whole bird bombs on these guys called mountain finches. Something good to go back on. In fact, a lot of my bird bombs are family oriented in terms of taxonomic families, not necessarily parents and kids. And next bird bombs is coming up in just a few weeks. Colorado plovers on August 15th. So I'll have that up on our DFO page probably by tonight to be open for registration. Colorado plovers, exploring that little neat little family of birds. And I even put the family name there for you, Charadriidae, or the plover family. And there's about 9 or so different plovers in Colorado. And some of them definitely present some ID challenges. The killdeer is a plover. It doesn't have plover in the name, but it's a plover, and we're real familiar with that one. But some of them are pretty hard or can be at different times. So tune in for Colorado plovers coming up on August 15th. Thanks everyone for watching tonight, and I'll see you next time.